Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. I looked around, almost expecting someone to jump out from behind the couch and laugh and say that a hidden camera was filming me. I would say it was Jerry Springer, but in his case, I would have been lured to his studio under a far-fetched pretext. This must be a joke. It was too surreal, too bizarre, too perverse to be true. I really wanted it all to turn out to be one big joke, tasteless and ill-conceived, but still a joke. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't because Marcy was following me around and repeating the same word in every sentence. I'm sorry. What was Marcy apologizing for? It may take me a lifetime to understand all this, but I will try to share the essence with you as much as I can. Marcy and I, Daniel Goodwin, and I weren't toddlers in the woods when we met. We haven't been in love with each other since childhood. Hell, we weren't even young, budding 20-somethings. We felt comfortable in our early 30s. So I guess naivety doesn't excuse me. However, we were both newbies. Neither of us had ever been married before. I came close to it once when I was young, innocent and guided by my small head, and Marcy once had a short-lived physical relationship in college. We met while working in different fields of activity. I was the manager of a small but profitable mine, and she was a consultant who conducted personality tests of our employees. Perhaps it was her ability to understand people that made her believe that she could get away with what she had done. More on this later. I can still remember her sitting across from me in my office and explaining how she intended to do the testing. It was hard for me to focus on her words. It was completely unprofessional of me, but there was something about her that took my breath away and I lost my common sense. Devoid of any meaning. Not that she was the epitome of Helen of Troy. Some might say that she was too tall, too slim. Many men would say that her nose is too long and her mouth is too wide. The same can be said about Julia Roberts, who was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. It didn't matter if it was too much or not too much. Marcy was too perfect for me. It so happened that the attraction turned out to be mutual, for which until recently I was always grateful. I did not have, and do not have, false illusions about my rating on the attractiveness scale. My mother, God bless her, always said that I have an interesting face rather than just a beautiful one, and, according to her, interesting is better. So I wasn't George Clooney, but rather David Strathairn. However, what I had was a sharp intellect and a good sense of humor, although I hadn't laughed much lately. Throughout the test period, Marcy flirted and I flirted back, but I didn't wait too patiently until her contract expired before calling her and asking her out. I thought about this date. I've been thinking a lot. In the end, I invited her to a picnic by a stream covered with pebbles, and after tasting pâté and brie with sliced apples, grapes and cherries, I taught her how to cook sapphires. She found the one I planted in her pot, and I still remember the look of surprise and excitement on her face. She entrusted me with her precious stone, and I cut it off and put it in the pendant she wore until the day she broke my heart. The acquaintance quickly turned into an engagement. The engagement. Such an old-fashioned word. It is a pity that it was not associated with old-fashioned values. Our engagement was just as short. 12 months after we met, we got married. The happiness of those early years only worsened the pain of the last days. How could we and I sincerely believe that it was us, be so happy just to be here? How could it have turned out like this? How did the passionate search for housing, laughter, and love, when we painted, renovated, and turned it into our dream home, turn into my current nightmare? How? The beginning of the end began innocently enough, with a knock on the door. Marcy returned to the kitchen, where we were sitting at the table, helping ourselves to traditional Sunday coffee and a newspaper. How I loved this simple ritual. She was pale. Shaky. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, fearing that one of our parents had been in a fatal accident. Otherwise, why would she be so upset when she heard a knock on the door? Daniel. Julian. Julian found me. I spilled my coffee. I knew who Julian was. He was her first outspoken declaration of love. A love child conceived from her childhood sweetheart. Both were only 17. And the families decided that the best option for all concerned would be to put the child up for adoption. Marcy gave him a name and passed it on to a young childless couple. From time to time, after drinking a couple more glasses of wine, She wondered where he was and what he was doing. What? How? I don't know. I don't know. He's in the living room. I got up and followed her. And there, on our couch, sat a young man. I could only see the back of his head. He had dark hair curled at the ends. It looks like he inherited Marcy's curls. Marcy squeezed my hand. The clenching of his knuckles was almost painful. She led me around the living room until we were face to face with Julian, who stood up and held out his hand to me. I tried to restrain my reaction, but I couldn't help but cast a questioning glance in Marcy's direction. She never mentioned that Jay, her childhood sweetheart, was Indian or Pakistani. This could explain why both pairs of grandparents decided it was best to give the child up for adoption. Hello, Mr. Goodwin. I'm sorry that I suddenly appeared on your doorstep. I didn't know what else to do. I nodded, held out my hand, and shook it tightly. Hello, Julian. Please call me Daniel. Julian smiled. Thanks. I've been looking for my mom for so long. I've just arrived in the city. I know I should have found a place to stay and made contact in a less unexpected way, but I've been dreaming about this moment for so long that I couldn't wait for the next day. Julian spoke excellent English, and I was sure that many young ladies liked his lilting accent. I studied him, trying to find something of Marcy in his features. He had nothing but shiny dark hair. His father must have been a good-looking guy. Julian reminded me of the guy who played the girl's rival in the second of the best exotic films, Marigold Hotel. He looked like a movie star. Marcy squeezed my hand even tighter. You can stay here. She turned to me. He can. Can't he, Daniel? What could I say? Not too much, so as not to look like a jerk. By the end of the day, Julian was ensconced in our guest bedroom, and Marcy was trembling all over. Never, even in our early days, had I seen her so excited. She was visibly shaking. To be honest, I didn't really want Julian to live with us under our roof, but I wanted to support Marcy. I knew that she had doubts and feelings of guilt because she agreed with her parents' decision made many years ago. If Julian's presence here had helped her for a while, I would have swallowed my doubts. In the months that followed, I tried not to resent Julian's intrusion into our lives. Our little rituals have been changed or thrown aside to accommodate his presence. We no longer drank glasses of wine while cooking dinner side by side. No more leisurely Sunday awakenings, which you can spend in bed, and then have coffee with the newspaper and solve the crossword puzzle together. No more Saturday walks in the markets or antique shops. No more hiking trips to the mountains. Even the number of our daily messages has been reduced to almost zero. And then new traditions appeared. Now Marcy and Julian were cooking together. They were mostly curry dishes. As much as I loved all kinds of Indian cuisine, there were too many of them almost every night. If I wanted something like steak, I had to arrange it with Marcy so that she and Julian could go out in the evening, since Julian was raised as a Hindu, and the fact that I ate beef was offensive to him. The two of them began to go for a weekend walk somewhere. Although nothing was said directly, they both made it clear that they would prefer that I did not follow them around. Obviously, museums and galleries would seem boring to me. In the evenings, you could watch them, with their heads bent towards each other, talking and exchanging jokes. Or watching their hugs, which always seemed to last too long. Or listening to him, a grown man, call her mommy like a little boy. I felt like the third person in my marriage, an uninvited guest in his own house. I was trying to stop the flow. I asked her out on dates, surprised her with flowers. The list goes on. The lack of reciprocity on her part hurt. I can't deny it. Little by little, my wife was moving away from me, and all the time I felt like my hands were tied and my tongue was in a sheath. I couldn't say anything without sounding like a selfish, insecure, jealous jerk. I looked for different jobs for Julian, but none of them were suitable for one reason or another. I sent him and Marcy offers to rent apartments. I offered to pay his rent until he gets settled. And again, none of the clues, none of my suggestions yielded anything. My frustration grew. Along with this, my indignation grew. Our previously wonderful life has turned into ruins. Quickly, late at night, purely physical relief. Our intimacy has disappeared. Our lovemaking, sensuality, and experimentation have disappeared. My wife and my marriage were disappearing before my eyes. As the months passed, my happiness deteriorated more and more every day. I was lonely living in a house with two other people. I might as well have been living alone, despite all the efforts Marcy and Julian made to attract me. If Marcy noticed my pain and confusion, she ignored them. She definitely avoided being alone with me for a while. I was sure that this was done in order to prevent my collision with her. Marcy cut back on her contract work, so her only financial contribution to our family was income from lecturing at college, where she worked part-time. So not only was I excluded, but I was also asked to finance this exclusion. I felt like I was being kept around just to pay for their lifestyle. He was the reason she lost interest in her career, in me, in our life together, so I resented him, and eventually her. The last straw was that their actions began to affect my work. I was responsible for the lives of 160 people, not only for their livelihood, but also for their well-being, for their safety. The decisions I made could have led to death if they were made incorrectly. Suddenly, I decided to take a week off. I needed to collect my thoughts. I needed to have a serious talk with Marcy. Stop beating around the bush. Everything had to change. I couldn't and didn't want to go on like this. I took a day off on Thursday, and on Friday I left for half a day to sort out some business. On the way home, I stopped to buy flowers and wine. I planned to steal Marcy from Julian for the evening and take her to one of our favorite restaurants, a small French bistro. Perhaps, far from our house, far from Julian, she will not only hear my words, but also listen. And, as a bonus, I would get a steak cooked perfectly. I was encouraged by my decision, secretly hoping that my calm and reasoned arguments would reach my emotionally absent wife over the past 9 months. I came in holding flowers and a briefcase. The house was quiet except for the Indian sitar music coming from the upper floor. I assumed it was coming from Julian's room. I dropped my briefcase in the hallway and the flowers in the kitchen sink. I went up the stairs to our bedroom, intending to take a shower and change my work clothes. No wonder the bedroom door was open. The music coming from there confused me for a moment. I stepped into the doorway and froze. I couldn't figure out what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. My first reaction was self-loathing for conjuring up such a disgusting image. Why? Why did the image of my wife appear in my imagination, naked, hugging her son? What kind of abnormal man was I if I cherished such thoughts in my subconscious? The floor beneath me seemed to sway. It spiraled around like a vertigo. I gasped. The music drowned it out. Just as she drowned out their sighs and whispers, the soft rustle of the sheets as they clung to each other. Their tortuous movements continued, and I stood rooted to the spot, swaying, but at the same time pierced, as if someone had pinned my feet to the floor. My stomach kept clenching and my throat was fighting it. I swallowed the bile of disgust that was looking for a way out. Her pendant, which I made for her, swung like a pendulum. I wanted to look away from him and from the abomination in front of me, but I couldn't. It was the anchor that kept me from falling when my world turned upside down. It was like watching an impending car crash, in which people will inevitably die. You want to turn away, but you can't. The accident attracts too much to resist. My wife, the love of my life, was sick and perverted, depraved. Marcy, Marcy, what have you done? My heart is broken. As much as I disliked Julian, what Marcy allowed to happen, it didn't matter who seduced whom. She had to be a mature woman, was wrong. He was only 20. No matter how much he considers himself a man, he still has a lot to do to grow up. And Marcy, with her knowledge of personality types, was able to manipulate him. I had to do something. What? Call the police. They'll need proof. I rummaged in my pants pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking. It took me 3 attempts to open the phone. I inhaled, trying to stop my hands from shaking, and took a video of them. They didn't notice anything. When I saw them on my phone screen, everything started to seem even worse. It's a disgusting video. More bile rose in my throat. It burned. I couldn't take it anymore. Putting the phone in my pocket, I turned around, went down the stairs, and headed for the kitchen. I soaked a kitchen towel and put it to the back of my head. The coolness was soothing. I wrapped it around my neck and shoulders while I was filling a glass with water. I took a long sip, rinsed my mouth with it to wash away the bitterness, and spat it out into the sink. On shaky legs, I sat down at the kitchen table and took my phone out of my pocket again. My conversation with the police was short. Hopefully, They would not take long to wait. I couldn't stand the sound of the sitar coming down the stairs anymore. You might as well have been running your fingernails over a slate. Every note was excruciating. I just wanted to escape from the hell my house had become. I heard the car doors opening and closing and headed for the front door. It seemed like an eternity before I covered that short distance. 2 policemen, a man and a woman, were standing in the doorway. No one said a word when I pointed to the stairs. The policemen crept forward with police batons in their hands and slowly and silently climbed the stairs. With that, the sounds of the sitar playing ended and the screams began. There were thuds and scuffles. Each of them made me shudder. And then there was silence. No music. No thuds. No screams. Only muffled voices. I stared at the landing. The male policeman appeared first, leading Julian, handcuffed and wearing only boxers. Marcy and the female officer followed him. I swallowed. Marcy was also handcuffed. She was wearing her favorite robe, tied tightly at the waist. She lowered her head, but I could see that her face was white. And even worse, the blush of passion still stained her breasts in the shape of the letter V, visible in the neckline of the robe. Marcy turned her head in my direction. Horror and disgust must have shown on my face. "He's not my son," she wailed, repeating to herself with every step. Over and over, "He's not my son. He's not my son." Her voice set me free. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, and her words haunted me. "You'll have a chance to prove it, Mrs. Goodwin, at the station." I hovered around the table, not knowing what to do next. A male policeman returned. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm Officer Kaplan. Could you share with me the video you mentioned? This is evidence." For the 3rd time in less than an hour, I took my phone out of my pocket and forwarded Officer Kaplan a clip I had made of their connection. "Marcy and Juliana. Daniel. May I call you Daniel?" When I nodded, he continued, "Daniel, you must be in shock. Is there anyone I can call?" "No. I'll be fine. I just need time to think. To realize this. I had no idea until I came across this." Kaplan rummaged in his shirt pocket and handed me a business card. "There is my mobile number on the back. I will contact you as we may need to gather evidence for prosecution. Can you stay somewhere else for a few days?" "Yes. I can't stay here. Not now. I'll get a room at the hotel. Keep your phone with you, if you don't mind. We may need to ask you a few questions." "Good." With that, he left, and I was left alone. The house became eerily quiet. The silence weighed on me. I needed to escape. I looked at the stairs. I had to climb it to collect some clothes. Fear twisted my stomach. Clothes could be bought, but what was there could not go unnoticed. And I did not want to see the consequences of Marcy's betrayal in the form of a mess of sheets and scattered clothes. I've had enough problems with representations as it is. I grabbed my keys and briefcase and went out the front door. A few minutes after I got behind the wheel, I realized that I shouldn't have done this. I will be the cause of the accident that was just waiting in the wings. I pulled over to the side of the road, parking badly, but that was the least of my worries. Luckily for me, I parked just a few steps away from the cafe. It was quite crowded, but I found an empty table in the far corner. I didn't feel like eating or drinking, but I knew I had to order something to justify the occupied space. I chose coffee with chocolate cake, mainly because I read somewhere that chocolate helps with shock. And I was really shocked. Shocked to the core. My thoughts ricocheted in my head like a ball in a pinball machine. One thought flew in one direction, but immediately bounced off another, which sent it on a different trajectory. None of this made sense. Coffee and cake were placed in front of me, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. I felt like I was learning to eat and drink all over again. I had to give myself conscious instructions. Bring the cup to your mouth. Take a sip. Swallow it. Cut a piece of cake with a spoon. Scoop it up and put it in your mouth. Chew. Swallow. Repeat. It helped. The rhythm helped me gain some control over my chaotic thoughts. Marcy had an affair. With my son. Or maybe not. Were her cries of, "He's not my son," true, or just another lie? Anyway, she brought her lover to our house. She lived with him under the roof I provided. Right under my nose. It's a lie. So many lies. Months of deception. Betrayal. His audacity took my breath away. I struggled to grasp the full extent of it. I felt sick for a completely different reason. I was so stupid. A fool. So gullible and naive. I didn't know what to believe. Was he her son? I've never doubted the lack of similarity. Julian's obvious Indian ancestry. Nothing. I didn't doubt anything. I just believed blindly. If I stopped thinking of them as mother and son, their interaction would seem completely obvious. All those hugs that lasted too long. Touching. I was such a gullible idiot. Oh, how they must have laughed at me. I felt like I was being used. She used my love for her against me in every sense of the word. Emotionally, mentally, physically, and financially. How could I not notice this depravity in her? How did she hide her true identity from me for so long? Almost 6 years. Almost 6 years have passed from the moment she first entered my office to today. Never, not even in a million years, did I think she was capable of such evil. I raised the coffee to my lips and was surprised to find that the cup was empty. I looked at the plate. There are only a few crumbs left of the chocolate cake. I carefully put the cup down on the table, feeling a little lost. For a few moments, I had nothing to do. Think about it, Daniel. Think. If this happened to your friend, what advice would you give him? The answer came quickly, like a flash. Protect yourself. She showed me who she was. It's time to believe her. She was a parasite, a skilled liar, a man without a concept of good and evil, without morals, without ethics, merciless, probably a sociopath, maybe a pervert with abnormalities. She wouldn't hesitate to throw me under the bus. In a way, she's already done it. It was time for me to take care of man number one. I looked around the street and saw what I was looking for: a branch of my bank. Fortunately, there was a branch of another bank 2 houses away. They were just about to attract a new client. I wanted to take only half of the amount, but then I remembered that I had been supporting this depraved couple for several months. In the end, I left her $10, and that was only because the account was shared, and I was afraid I would need her signature to close it. This led me to credit cards. I rarely used mine, and at the moment it had a zero balance. Marcy, on the other hand, usually received a considerable amount of money every month. She was set up to pay in full from a shared account. The university paid her monthly salary a week before the funds were debited from her credit card. In most cases, her earnings were not enough to pay for purchases with a credit card. I didn't want her to have the difference. She's robbed me enough as it is. It was while I was waiting for my new accounts to open that the solution appeared by itself. I needed to make a public statement that starting today, Marcy and I are breaking up and that I will not be responsible for any debt she makes. It might not work. It may not be legally binding, but it was worth a try. As I left the bank, I glanced at my watch, hoping that I would have time to place an ad on the internet so that it would appear in tomorrow's issue. Thank God. I brought my briefcase when I left the house. Luck was on my side. After the public notice was posted, I contacted the lawyers, and I managed to arrange a meeting for the following Monday. It gave me the weekend to gather all the necessary information and documents. Next on my list was a real estate agent. I needed an assessment of the house. I didn't want to leave him. Yesterday, it was my dream home. Today is my house of horrors. If Marcy hadn't gone to jail, she could have bought out my share, or the house would have had to be sold. I definitely wasn't going to continue living there. A quick Google search revealed that there are 3 agencies on the main street. I looked out of the car window and saw one of them. Great. Of course, one of them could meet me there on the weekend. Tom Harris from one agent was more than happy to meet me the next morning in what I already considered my former home. After taking urgent protective measures, I felt calmer. I came to my senses a little bit, and I felt tired. I went to the Sheraton Hotel. That's where we always put any board member when he came to the facility. I knew they had several high-end retail stores, as well as a restaurant and bar on the ground floor. It was an expensive way to get dressed for the next few days, but I was exhausted and didn't want to waste time going from store to store for the necessary things. After the third attempt to get into my room using an electronic key card, oh, how I missed the keys, I finally got access. I went to the bed, throwing my purchases on it. I shook my head as I undressed. Who on earth would have thought it was okay to pay more than $50 for one pair of boxers? They must be gilded. Naked, I headed to the bathroom, hoping that a hot shower would wash away the memories of Marcy making love to her son on our bed. Wash away this day and the last 9 months. Unfortunately, Despite all my protective measures, my ability to turn off the emotional part of my brain has been shaken. The image of Marcy wrapping her arms and legs around Julian, writhing as she straddled him, with the pendant swinging on her chest, didn't wash away like sweat. The pain and disgust were physical. I wondered if the burning agony, the oppressive heaviness that I felt in my chest, was a heart attack. I definitely felt that way. Part of me wished it were so. Everything, including death, was better than what I was experiencing. I leaned against the shower wall and prayed that there was some truth in the old saying that time heals all wounds. I ordered room service. They brought me a steak, and although I could see that they cooked it perfectly, it tasted like sawdust. Damn that fool. Damn her. I crawled under the covers, still cursing Marcy. The only good thing about this day was that I was so emotionally exhausted that both my body and brain shut down. I blacked out as soon as my head hit the pillow. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into the house on Saturday morning, but it definitely wasn't Marcy, dressed in a light negligee that left little to the imagination, with a glass of wine in her hand. She, of course, quickly posted a deposit. Tom's eyes almost popped out of their sockets at the sight of her barely covered breasts. "Daniel, we need to talk," she muttered, looking at Tom sheepishly. This told me that the wine in her hand wasn't the first, and it wasn't even noon yet. "Oh, I'd say you actually said all that yesterday, Marcy. A picture replaces 1,000 words and all that." I turned to Tom. "So, as you can see, this is the main entrance. If you follow me, I can show you the kitchen. It's new. She's only a little over a year old." Tom looked confused, but he still walked past Marcy to follow me. "The countertops are made of quartz. The mudguards are made of glass. There's a storage room there." "Daniel, what are you doing?" Without turning around, I replied, "I'm giving Tom a big tour so he can appreciate it." "Rate it? For what?" "For the house, of course. But we're not selling." Would you like me to come back another time, Daniel? Do you need some time to sort out your wife?" "No, there's no need for that, Tom." I turned to Marcy. "You may not want to sell, but I do. So, you can either buy out my share, or we can put the house up for sale. Anyway, we need an assessment." I went back to Tom. "As I said, all household appliances are at the highest level. There is also a wine cellar, although I suppose it is technically a wine room." We went from room to room. I pointed out the specifics, and Tom took notes and photographs. Marcy followed us, alternately whimpering and trying to interrupt. I said both. Tom tried his best to ignore her. I sympathized with the guy, but hey, after the sale, his hefty commission would compensate for any awkwardness that arose. When I saw him off, he assured me that he would decide on the assessment overnight and contact me the next day. Excellent. Another work done in connection with the separation of my life and Marcy's life. I closed the door and turned around. Marcy was so close that I almost knocked her down. She reached out and grabbed my arm to keep from falling, and the smell of sour wine mixed with the smell of her perfume hit my nostrils. I got goosebumps on my skin. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this." As I said, "We have nothing to talk about." "Please, Daniel, let me explain." I looked at her intently. "Will explanations make you feel better?" "Yes." "Well, Marcy, after the perversion I witnessed yesterday, which was the culmination of 9 months of deception, 9 months of betrayal after betrayal, I'm not at all interested in doing anything to make you feel better. Daniel, you're rushing into a decision you might regret." I laughed mockingly. She must have been joking. "What exactly will I regret, Marcy? That I'll see you making love to your son? He's not my son. And that's what you're saying, you liar and treacherous traitor. So, what would I regret? About being lied to? About being betrayed? Maybe about being used? About being made a fool of? What would I regret? To lose your love. You'd miss me. We're good together. Will I lose my love? Oh, I think it's clear that I lost her almost a year ago. I was just too trusting to realize it. Damn it, that's assuming you've ever really loved me at all. And, Marcy, you've been absent by all accounts for several months now, so adding your physical absence to this list is unlikely to cause excitement. I really love you, Daniel. I really do. This Julian thing took me by surprise. You could say she took me by surprise. He was in my class. There was something about him. I just felt an instant connection. I was, confused and a little obsessed. Instant communication? Stunned? A little obsessed? Marcy, he moved in with you. You were flaunting your affection. I made love to him in our bed. She told me he was your son. You told my parents the same thing. As far as I know, he really is your son, and you are a depraved fool. Sick pervert. No, 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 she moaned. You can't believe it. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Yes, your actions speak about it loud and clear. I replied with sarcasm in every word. It's true. You have to believe me. No, I don't believe it, Marcy. I don't have to believe a word you say anymore. You gave up your right to my blind faith the day the first lie about me came out of your mouth. I don't want a divorce, she whispered, and I don't want to have a depraved pervert as my wife. A treacherous, lying, exploiting, and cheating fool. I think we're both lucky. Daniel, please. I've already told you that he's not my son. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. I'm not interested in your arguments, Marcy. You can write a whole book about your actions. After saying these words, I realized that they were true. I knew that there was nothing that could justify her betrayal. And no matter what you say, nothing will make me look at you or think of you with anything other than disgust. With disgust. But you love me. You couldn't just turn off love like a faucet, she wailed. Marcy, whom I loved, died almost a year ago. If, of course, it existed at all. Maybe she was the character you played. Maybe she wasn't real. Maybe you were an illusion. Fool me again. But don't worry, Marcy. I've learned my lesson. I went around her and up the stairs. I wrinkled my nose. Perhaps it was my imagination, but I was convinced that the smell of love was in the master bedroom. I took a suitcase out of the dressing room and, glancing at the rumpled bed, put it on the floor. I didn't want to dirty it with Marcy and Julian's dirt. I methodically rummaged through drawers and hangers, filling a suitcase, and when it was full, I took out a second suitcase. I filled it up along with a small carry-on bag. Room by room, I put my things away. I wasn't being sentimental or stupid. I didn't leave it all to Marcy. To hell with her. If I liked something, I took it away. If there was nothing else, I could sell it later. By the time I finished, I had accumulated too many boxes and bundles for my car, so I called my father and asked him to come with his trailer. Not for the first time in my life. I thanked the universe for my father's ability to understand my voice and mood. He didn't ask any questions. He decided to save them for later. Throughout the whole process, Marcy followed me around, trying to start a conversation, perhaps hoping that her pleas, tears, or plaintive lamentations would touch me. But this did not happen. In fact, the opposite is true. I shut down. It was just another lie and treachery. New manipulations. I had no idea where Julian was. I didn't care. I heard the noise of my father's car and turned to Marcy. If you say a word to my father, I will tell him how, when I came home, I found you making love to your son. Marcy ignored my words. Can you hear me? Marcy nodded, flinching at the threat in my tone. I opened the front door. My father looked at me, and then over my shoulder at Marcy before looking back at me. I could tell by the look on his face that he had correctly assessed the situation. Good. What do you need to move? I took a cart with me in case any of this turned out to be big. I smiled and silently thanked God for my always practical father. He followed my example and ignored Marcy while we worked together. It was a real feat when she followed us from room to room, sobbing and looking battered. We worked almost in silence, guiding each other with nods and gestures. I felt like I was surrounded by a force field, and Marcy's screams were bouncing off my shield. Who knows how long my defense will last? Hopefully long enough for me to be able to distance myself from my current situation. When we had packed the last load, my father put his hand on my shoulder. Follow me, son. I nodded, and the events of the last 24 hours began to pop into my mind. The trip was a blur. When we stopped, I saw that we were parked in front of a warehouse not far from my parents' house. I leaned against the steering wheel, realizing that for the entire time of packing, I had never thought about what I would do with all this equipment. We went inside, and I let Dad handle the paperwork. I was exhausted. The employee put a map on the counter and marked the place with a red pin. He handed me the keys. I followed my father blindly. We unpacked everything except my suitcases and hand luggage. I'll meet you at home, Dan. I nodded. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in my parents' kitchen, and my mother was pushing a cup of coffee towards me. We'll be here when you're ready to explain everything, my mother said quietly. Her voice was gentle, the voice of my childhood. That was enough. My force field collapsed. I couldn't stand it and burst into tears like a child. She hugged me, and my father patted me on the shoulder. The whole terrible story sounded distorted, and my words were interspersed with sighs and screams of horror from my parents. Her son? No, no, no. Oh God, of course not, moaned Mom, shaking her head. Perhaps my words also put into it the images that were in my head. She loved Marcy and took care of her from their first meeting. She says he's not her son. I do not know what to believe, Mom. What are you going to do? My father asked. I called the police. I believe they are conducting an investigation. To be honest, I was surprised that she was at home today. I thought she was in jail. Divorce? My mother whispered, and her voice was barely audible. I nodded. You better take care of yourself, Dan. After what she's already done, you can't know what other depths she's ready to sink to. You don't want her to run away with all your savings. I've already done everything, Dad. We talked a little more. Mom insisted that I stay with them until I found a house or apartment that could be rented. It was a relief. I didn't want to be alone. 1. I thought I would have to get used to this condition. A vision of my future appeared before me. It looked like a long, lonely, barren landscape. Damn Marcy. Damn that fool. That night, as I lay in the darkness of my childhood bedroom and could not sleep, I remembered lines from a book that I read. It seemed 100 years ago. I couldn't remember the exact words, but their essence boiled down to the fact that when something in your life goes wrong, bad news, death, betrayal of a spouse, it feels like a punch in the gut. It's like you're taking your breath away. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. It's like saying that a point-blank shot is equivalent to a mosquito bite. I mentally replayed the horror that gripped me when I saw Marcy writhing in the arms of her son, her lover, in the bed she shared with me. I remembered that moment as clearly as if I was still in it. I could still hear the sounds of the sitar and the rustle of the sheets. I could still smell Marcy's perfume, and I could hear my breath catch in shock. I could feel my heart pounding wildly, and something was squeezing hard in my chest. No amount of effort would stop my mind from making me relive this moment over and over again. It was an abscess that my brain just needed to rip off. What I felt when wave after wave of horror and disgust overwhelmed me with the same force as when I stood in the doorway and watched what was happening for the first time was much worse than losing my breath from a blow to the solar plexus. The closest thing I could accurately describe is to say that it was like someone had put a powerful vacuum cleaner to my heart and sucked the life out of me. All the things that made me myself. Intangible things that had absolutely no physical meaning. For example, my height or shoulder width, and yet were much more important in determining who I was. Things like my thoughts and feelings, my memories and experiences. The departed. Everything is gone. The departed. A pathetic word is so inappropriate. I was an empty vessel. What filled the void was not good, kind, and caring. It was anger and hatred. I didn't fight it. It was nice that they had the upper hand. It was better than opening the floodgates to doubt, better than succumbing to despair, better than collapsing under the weight of losing my dreams, and certainly better than the unbearable pain trying to kick down my door and cripple me. The hatred that filled my empty stomach was palpable and as real as the bed I was lying on. It overwhelmed me, oozing out of me like a thick, destructive river of corrosive poison. I made no effort to stop her flow or hide her abomination. It was nice that he saw daylight without a mask hiding his ugliness. Somewhere deep inside, I felt uneasy, but I didn't care. I knew that my mother would hardly have recognized the man sleeping in her son's room. I hardly recognized him. The path to divorce was long and difficult. The press reported a possible incest. It made the front page, and a week later a retraction appeared on page 20. The tiny note was easy to miss. Marcy was notorious, and I was much less so. It cost Marcy her place at the university and me money, because the court ruled that I had to support Marcy until the issue of our divorce was resolved. Another reason to hate my monster. As if the publicity wasn't enough, Marcy struggled with the divorce at every turn. I endured endless negotiations, sitting across from her in the conference room with either her lawyer or my own. The negotiations where I looked at her, mentally imagining my hand reaching across the table, turning into a claw that punctures her rib cage and rips out her heart. I waded through the rubble of legal jargon, seeing words written in red in blood. Marcy's blood. The worst part was that I spent several hours in court-ordered consultations. At the counseling sessions where Marcy wore her damn pendant, I had to pretend that I didn't want to put my hands around her throat and knock the wind out of her. During these consultations, she convinced me over and over again that Julian was not her son. She emailed me the evidence and put the printed copies in my hands at the very first session. It was as if the only thing that kept me from reconciling with her was proof that Julian's DNA was different from hers. Nothing I said, nothing my lawyer said, damn it. Not even the polite questions from the family counselor, designed to make Marcy realize the extent of his betrayal, failed to breach Marcy's defenses. With every delay, every obstacle she put in my way, she fueled the monster living inside me. A monster who bided his time before taking revenge. Through his eyes, not covered by pink glasses, I saw the depth of her selfishness. If she really loved me, she would have let me go, wishing me happiness above all else. This is exactly what I would have done for her if she had come to me when she first fell in love, lusted, in Julian. It would have saddened me, completely unsettled me, but then her happiness was of paramount importance to me, and therefore, if her happiness depended on someone else, no matter how difficult it was, I would have let her go. If she had done that, the monster would never have been born. Not like Marcy. After my one-on-one personal meetings with the therapist, which were also ordered by the court, I came to understand that Marcy needed my forgiveness. She needed my love to keep going. She needed me to bring her back to life, and she would continue to live as if nothing had happened in the last year and a half. Then, and only then, would she be able to come to terms with herself. She needed me to help her forget about her disgusting actions and her overwhelming guilt. She needed me to help her live in denial. Denial of your inner monster. I didn't give her what she needed. What I gave her was a temptation. I found Julian, who turned out to actually be Ravi Singh. Well, technically, one of my engineers found it. The guy was a programmer, and although he worked as an engineer, he did not have a document confirming his qualifications. 5 years earlier, I saw something special in him and gave him a chance. I have never regretted this decision. Quite the opposite. He was priceless. I've never met a person whose brain worked as well as his. His social skills might have been lousy, but his mind was razor sharp. He mastered software, wrote code, and regularly offered ready-made solutions. And he was devoted to me. Between you and me, we've made inquiries about Julian. They probably knew him as well as his family. We anonymously provided him with information and brought him back to Marcy. She, in her vanity, may not have understood the reason for his interest, but I did. He wanted to get a residence permit in Australia as soon as possible. I bet he didn't have much time left before he was sent back to India, and he had already spent months of effort on Marcy. It turns out she lied to him too. She told him that we had a sham relationship. Obviously, he was very upset to find out that we were married. All these efforts were in vain, but not so much that he was upset that he wasn't ready to meet her again. Give her another chance. And Marcy, forever remorseful for what she did, and who, I only love you, Daniel, did not have to be persuaded for long. When all hopes of our reconciliation collapsed and our divorce became final, it was only a few weeks before she started dating Julian again. Whatever this guy has in his pants must be pretty powerful stuff. My monster grinned. My always kind mom, who I think wanted me not to feel so rejected, suggested that maybe Marcy needed to cheat on me because she did it all out of great love. A bond that's bigger than both of us. Love, like Romeo and Juliet. A love that could not be denied. A love that, in Marcy's opinion, justified all the pain, betrayal, and abuse of trust necessary for her and Julian to be together. What nonsense. It's not like I said that to my sweet, romantic mom. In my opinion, Marcy could tell herself whatever she wanted. I knew that wasn't the case. My monster knew that wasn't the case. She was just a treacherous fool who liked to make love to a guy who was old enough to be her son. The difference was that it didn't bother me anymore. In fact, I was counting on it now, and I was counting on Julian to step up his campaign. He didn't let me down. It only took him 3 months to get her pregnant. Shock, horror, amazement. Marcy must have forgotten that constant diarrhea and vomiting affect the effectiveness of the pills. I wonder what Julian fed her. Hopefully another damn curry. Nothing could please me more. And her antics with the subsequent pregnancy. Predictably, Julian used his conservative Indian background to demand that they get married. Not that Marcy protested much. A vain fool would never have wondered why a young, attractive man seduced a woman who was old enough to be his mother. When I told my father about it, he laughed. He also understood the level of Marcy's vanity and stupidity. In fact, I should have thanked my father for inspiring me to create a way to retaliate. My monster would have preferred something simpler and more intuitive, but even he saw the point in not ending up in prison for the rest of our days. When a man steals your wife, there's no better revenge than letting him keep her. That's what he told me that first night when I told him about the extent of Marcy's betrayal. It was the best advice he ever gave me, and he's given me a lot over the years. So Marcy was in her late 40s, pregnant, and had just married a guy who was almost 20 years younger than her. They both acted as predicted. My monster thanked Marcy for her insight, and now it's time to pull the trigger. The newlyweds went to Trinity for 10 days. When all was said and done, I had to find a way to thank them both for making my job so much easier. Their absence made it easier to place bags of fertilizers and aluminum powder in their garage, which I had been collecting for many months at my mine. I really love my job. It was stored along with cans of diesel fuel and bags of old nuts, bolts, and nails. Everything you need for a homemade bomb. After that, all it took was an anonymous message to the federal police from a concerned citizen. Julian was arrested when he was returning from his honeymoon. Fortunately for me, they weren't as fascinated by him as my ex-wife. I really wonder what I would have done if they had just let him go. I'm glad I didn't have to cross that bridge. Once again, the adorable couple made headlines. Notoriety couldn't be a more worthy couple. This time, Marcy wasn't photographed so well. The pregnancy was taking its toll on her. I think having a child at the age of 40 was a little harder for the body than for a woman in her 20s or 30s. A few months later, good old Ravi was deported. He returned to India with a note in his personal file that he would never be allowed to enter Australia. And Marcy? Well, she moved to the Australian equivalent of the Wild West, the Northern Territory, probably hoping to escape her notoriety. She gave birth to a healthy boy. That was 5 years ago. All I know about Marcy now is that she is in her 40s and a single mother with a mulatto child. I hope this is a good form of contraception. She cannot work in her chosen profession because her reputation has been undermined. Any potential employer or teaching position would require a recommendation, and her candidacy would be called terrible. Who would want to hire a woman suspected of incest or the wife of a terrorist? Other than these assumptions, I have no idea how things are going for her or her child. What kind of job she was looking for or got. Whether she stayed in Darwin or moved to another place. I don't know anything about her movements. That's what I want, and my inner monster. It turns out that my inner monster has boundaries, not to harm children. And I couldn't hurt Marcy anymore without her child feeling the consequences of that harm. He, my monster, my temporary insanity, has been sleeping for a long time and, hopefully, will remain so forever. My sweet miracle, my wife Cassie and our baby, a bundle of energy, have never seen or felt his presence. It's nice to feel love, warmth, and kindness flowing through my veins again. I found peace. End.